I left town for 3 days, just 3. And when I came back, someone had drawn orange lines around my house like it was a piece of furniture waiting to be rearranged. And I'm not talking about some HOA notice or a friendly neighbor suggestion. I'm talking full-on construction markings, heavy equipment idling in my driveway, and a steel rig the size of a small bridge being bolted together 10 feet from my front porch. Yeah, they were getting ready to move my house. Not metaphorically, not legally, not even with permission, physically move it. And the craziest part? They thought I'd just go along with it. So let me rewind a bit because this didn't start overnight. It started the moment the new neighbors showed up, the kind of people who don't just buy land, they acquire vision space. That's actually what they called it. I remember standing there thinking, oh, great, we got ourselves a couple of visionaries. Their names were Ethan and Marissa Cole, straight out of Silicon Valley. Money wasn't just something they had. It was something they weaponized, and from day one, they treated the entire hillside like a blank canvas that somehow included my property, which, last time I checked, I paid for. Now my place. It's not fancy, not even close, just a cabin I built with my own hands about 10 years ago, anchored into bedrock, sitting on the only stable patch of flat land on a steep, winding hillside, surrounded by trees, quiet, private, the kind of place you move to when you want the world to leave you alone, and for a decade, it did. No issues, no disputes, just me and the occasional deer passing through like they owned the place more than I did. Then Ethan shows up with a drone. Not a small one either. This thing sounded like a lawnmower with wings, buzzing over my roof, dipping low over my porch, hovering like it was inspecting something. So I walked out, waved him down, kept it polite, because that's what you do, right? You give people a chance to act like decent human beings. I said, hey, man, can you keep that off my property? And he just smiled, not apologetic, not embarrassed, just amused, like I was interrupting his process. He goes, oh yeah, sorry about that, just mapping the terrain. Mapping the terrain. Like my home was a side note in his little project. That should have been the first red flag, but I let it go, mistake number 1. Fast forward about a month. I had to head out of town for work. Nothing unusual, locked everything up, left the place exactly how it always was, solid, untouched mine. When I got back, something fell off before I even stepped out of the truck. You ever get that feeling? Like the air itself is wrong, and then I saw it. Bright orange spray paint marking the ground around my cabin. Not random either, precise lines, angles, measurements, like someone had already decided what was going to happen here. And then I heard the engines. There were trucks, excavators, a flatbed loaded with steel beams, and right next to my porch, a partially assembled lifting frame, the kind they use when they relocate entire structures. My stomach dropped, not in a dramatic way, just heavy, like reality lagging behind what my eyes were seeing. I walked straight up to the nearest guy in a hard hat, clipboard in hand, the kind of guy who looks like he's just following orders and doesn't want to think too hard about them. I asked, what exactly is going on here? And he didn't even hesitate, didn't lower his voice, didn't act like this was unusual. He just flipped a page and said, we're preparing the lift site. The Coles approved a rotation adjustment, about 10 degrees clockwise, to optimize their sunrise view. I actually laughed for a second because I thought it had to be a joke. 10 degrees? Rotate my house. Like it's a patio chair? But he just stood there, waiting for me to process it like it was a completely normal Tuesday activity. So I called Ethan. He picked up immediately, cheerful, relaxed, like we were discussing landscaping or something minor. Hey, neighbor, he said, and I swear you could hear the smile through the phone. I asked him, why is there a construction crew preparing to move my house? And he goes, without missing a beat, oh yeah, we're realigning the hillside layout. Your cabin's angle blocks our eastern exposure, and we're investing a lot into this property, so we brought in a relocation team. It's actually pretty standard, shouldn't take more than a couple hours. A couple hours. I told him, you can't just move someone's house. And he actually chuckled, like I was being dramatic. It's not a big deal, he said. We'll handle everything. You'll barely notice the difference. Honestly, it'll improve your own property value too. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was entitlement, pure and simple. The kind that comes from never being told no, from living in a world where everything can be adjusted, bought, or redesigned to fit your preferences. I said, you didn't ask. And he replied, "We assumed you'd be reasonable." Reasonable. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back, took photos of everything. The markings, the machinery, the structure, every single detail, and just stood there for a moment, looking at my house, not as a home, but as something they had already decided to move, like my ownership was just a technical inconvenience. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation, this was going to be a fight. And if they thought they could just walk onto my land and rotate my house like it was part of their architectural vision, they had no idea what they just started. Now let me pause the story for a second, because what happened here might sound insane. And it is, but it's not as rare as you'd think when you mix money, property, and a certain type of personality that treats boundaries like suggestions. From a legal perspective, this situation is about as clear-cut as it gets. You don't touch someone else's structure, you don't modify it, you don't even step onto their land without permission. That falls under trespassing at best, and at worst. You're looking at property interference, potential structural endangerment, and in extreme cases, something close to attempted unlawful seizure of real property. And yeah, even preparing to move a structure without consent, that alone can trigger serious legal consequences. According to standard procedure, any adjustment involving property lines, structural relocation, or even shared boundaries requires written consent, permits, surveys, and inspections, and that's before a single piece of equipment shows up. The fact they skipped all of that, that's not confidence, that's negligence wrapped in arrogance. But here's where it gets more interesting, because this isn't just legal, it's psychological. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into when they've had too much control for too long. They start believing that inconvenience equals injustice. In Ethan's mind, my house blocking his sunrise wasn't just annoying, it was wrong, something that needed to be corrected. And once someone frames reality like that, they stop asking for permission and start making decisions for other people. And if you don't shut that down immediately, it escalates. Fast. Which is exactly what I was about to do. So yeah, once I realized this wasn't just some overstep, but a full-blown attempt to rewrite reality on my land, I didn't argue, I didn't negotiate, I didn't even go back to the crew. I got in my truck, drove straight into town, and walked into the one office I knew would understand exactly how serious this was. My attorney. Except calling her just an attorney doesn't really do it justice. She's the kind of person who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to. People just adjust when she speaks. Her name's Dana Mercer, and the moment I laid those photos on her desk, she didn't react right away, which honestly made it worse, because when someone like her goes quiet, it means they're already 10 steps ahead, mapping out consequences. She looked through everything slowly, the spray paint markings, the machinery, the steel frame halfway assembled, and then she leaned back and said, "Tell me they didn't actually say they were going to move your house." And I said, "Not just say it, they scheduled it." That's when she exhaled, not frustrated, not shocked, just disappointed, like she'd seen this type of entitlement before and already knew how it ends. Within an hour, she had everything pulled: my deed, the land survey, boundary confirmations, structural filings from when I built the cabin, all clean, all airtight. Then she looked at me and said, "All right, we're not just stopping this, we're documenting everything so thoroughly that if they even blink wrong, it costs them." First move, cease and desist. Immediate, aggressive, no room for interpretation. It laid out every violation: unauthorized entry, planned structural interference, risk of property damage, and intent to alter a fixed residence without consent. It was the legal equivalent of drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Cross this, and it gets expensive." We sent it over that same afternoon. And Ethan? Oh, he responded, just not the way a reasonable person would. Instead of backing off, he doubled down, except now he had a law firm talking for him. Some polished, high-end firm that probably charges more per hour than my truck is worth. Their response wasn't defensive, it was patronizing. They argued that the proposed adjustment would enhance overall property value in the area, that it was a mutually beneficial realignment, and, this was my favorite part, that I should consider sharing in the cost since I would indirectly benefit from the improved landscape symmetry. Landscape symmetry. They were trying to turn my house into a design problem. Dana didn't even bother responding line by line. She just filed for an emergency restraining order the next morning, along with claims for damages, interference, and potential endangerment. No theatrics, no threats, just paperwork that hits like a hammer when it lands on the right desk. And that's exactly what happened. The hearing was quick, almost too quick. Judge Keller, older guy, didn't waste time with long speeches or philosophical debates. He looked at the photos, flipped through the filings, then looked over his glasses and said, "They intended to move a residential structure without permission?" Dana nodded once. He didn't even ask a follow-up question. Absolutely not. That was it. Decision made. He issued a temporary restraining order on the spot, clear, direct, and honestly kind of beautiful in its simplicity. The Coles had 14 days to remove every piece of equipment, dismantle any structure they had started, restore my property to its original condition, and maintain a strict buffer zone. No construction within 100 feet of my cabin. And then came the part that mattered most. If the defendants fail to comply, he said, the plaintiff is authorized to remove any remaining materials or equipment at the defendant's expense. Now, if you've never heard something like that before, let me translate. It means if they don't clean up their mess, I get to do it for them and send them the bill. 14 days. That's all they had. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe reality had finally caught up with them. Maybe they'd realized this wasn't Silicon Valley anymore. This wasn't some abstract project they could pivot around. This was real land, real ownership, real consequences. Day 1 passed, nothing moved. Day 5, same equipment, same frame. Day 10, not even a loose bolt out of place. By day 14, it was clear they weren't going to comply. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't think they had to. That right there? That's the moment arrogance turns into liability. So on day 15, I stopped waiting. Sun wasn't even fully up yet when we rolled in. 2 excavators, a flatbed truck, a crew of welders, and a demolition team that looked like they'd been hoping for a job like this all week. I had copies of the court order printed, signed, stamped. One for me, one for the foreman, one for anyone who thought this was still a debate. The sheriff's office had already been notified, not because I expected trouble, but because when you're dealing with people like Ethan, you don't leave room for interpretation. We didn't make a speech, didn't knock on their door, we just got to work. The steel frame came down first. Welders cut through the joints like it was butter, beams hitting the ground one after another, the sound echoing across the hillside. The excavators moved in next, lifting, dragging, tearing apart anything that had been anchored into my land. Stakes, supports, temporary platforms, all of it pulled out, stacked, loaded like scrap. And the machinery they parked in my driveway? That was my favorite part. Chains went on, engines roared, and one by one, those machines were dragged out like they didn't belong there, because they didn't. By midday, the place looked completely different. No frame, no equipment, no signs of their project, just torn up dirt, tire marks, and the kind of silence that comes after something unnecessary finally gets removed. And right on cue they showed up. Ethan and Marissa pulled in fast, too fast, gravel kicking up behind them like they were arriving at a scene they thought they could still control. He jumped out of the car, already talking, voice raised, face red, not confused, not curious, angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, like this was still his operation. I didn't match his volume. Didn't need to. I just handed him the court order. He glanced at it, barely reading, then snapped, "You just destroyed private property." And that's when I said it, calm, simple, no extra words, no. "You tried to move my house." That was the moment it hit him, not emotionally, not morally, financially. You could see it in his face, the realization that this wasn't going to bend, wasn't going to negotiate, wasn't going to adapt to his version of reality. But he still tried. Of course he did. A few weeks later, I got the notice. He was suing for damages, claiming over $100,000 in losses from project delays, equipment removal, contract penalties, the whole list. It looked impressive on paper, I'll give him that. But court isn't about how something looks, it's about what actually happened. When the case came up, he barely got through his opening statement before Judge Keller stopped him. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to make it clear this wasn't going where he thought it was. "Your team failed to comply with a direct court order," the judge said, flipping through the file. "The plaintiff acted within authorized enforcement." Pause. Case dismissed. Just like that. No long debate, no back and forth done. And that was the end of it. No settlement, no apology, No grand resolution, just consequences, applied exactly where they were supposed to be. Because at the end of the day, this was never about a view, or a sunrise, or even a house. It was about someone thinking they could take control of something that wasn't theirs, and learning, the hard way, that not everything can be moved. So yeah, that's how it ended. No dramatic apology, no sudden moment of self-awareness from Ethan, no heartfelt, "we went too far" speech, just silence, a dismissed case, and a hillside that went back to being exactly what it was before they showed up, mine. And honestly, that's kind of the point. Not every story wraps up with closure. Sometimes it just stops when reality finally catches up with someone. But if you take a step back from all the noise, the machines, the arguments, there's something bigger going on here, something that shows up way more often than people realize. Because this wasn't really about my cabin, not entirely. It was about boundaries. And more specifically, what happens when someone decides your boundaries are optional? The lesson here is, ownership isn't just about what's written on paper, it's about what you're willing to defend. A lot of people assume that if something is obviously wrong, it'll correct itself, that the system will step in automatically, that common sense will win. But that's not how it works. Systems respond to action, not assumption. If I had ignored those markings, if I had waited, if I had tried to be reasonable in the way Ethan defined it, my house might have actually been moved before I could stop it. And then what? You're not undoing that with a polite conversation. And here's the uncomfortable part. People like Ethan don't start with extreme actions. They test. First it's a drone over your property, then it's a casual comment, then it's equipment showing up temporarily. Each step designed to feel just small enough that pushing back seems like overreacting. This is a psychological trap, because once you accept the first small violation, you've essentially told them where your line is, and more importantly, that it can be moved. And from their perspective, they're not being unreasonable. That's the wild part. In their mind, they're optimizing, improving, upgrading, whatever word justifies the outcome they want. Your resistance? That's the inconvenience. That's the problem to solve, which is why timing matters. According to standard procedure, the earlier you document and respond, the stronger your position becomes. Photos, records, written communication, those aren't overreactions, they're protection. Because once something escalates into a legal situation, it's not about who feels right. It's about who can prove it. And from a legal perspective, what saved me wasn't just the fact that I owned the land. It was that everything was clear, documented, and uncontested. No gray areas, no handshake agreements. No, we talked about it once and I assumed. Just clean lines, literally and legally. But there's another layer to this, and it's not about law. It's about identity. When someone tries to alter your space without permission, they're not just changing physical ground. They're testing whether you see yourself as someone who can be overridden. And if you hesitate, even a little, they'll keep going, not necessarily because they're evil, but because nothing told them to stop. That's why the response has to be decisive. Not aggressive, not reckless, but clear, immediate, unambiguous. Because here's the truth, most conflicts like this don't explode overnight. They build quietly, through ignored signals and delayed reactions, until one day you're standing in your own driveway wondering how things got this far. And by then, it's a lot harder to push back. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Pay attention to the small things. The little boundary tests, the harmless oversteps, the moments where something feels off but you're tempted to let it slide. Those are the moments that matter most. Because once someone believes they can move one thing, they'll try to move everything. Now I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have handled it the same way? Gone straight to legal action? Shut it down immediately? Or would you have tried to talk it out first? Maybe give them the benefit of the doubt? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because situations like this, they happen more often than people admit, just not always this extreme.